packing the ache away again. On the worst of days, when the restlessness and fear turned his blood to squirming spiders and his inaction became unbearable, his thoughts turned to nightmares. Hurt, gone, dead. But the very simple truth, the one that remained when every doubt swirled around him, was that Etta was simply too clever and stubborn to die. He'd purposefully extinguished the lantern hanging on the wall beside them, and he'd ordered just enough small plates of food and ale to allow them to keep their table without question. But his pockets had lightened as the hours wound down, and Nicholas knew that what little pay he'd scraped together from a morning's work unloading cargo on the docks wouldn't keep for much longer.
"She's not showing,"
Sophia growled at him from across the table. Nicholas pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to tamp down the swell of frustration before it carried him off. "Patience," he growled. The night wasn't over yet. "We aren't finished here." Sophia huffed, downing whatever was left in her pint before reaching over and snatching his, drawing appreciative looks from the next table over as she gulped the remainder of the ale.
"There,"
she said, slamming the tankard down.
"Now we can go."
In his 20-odd years of life, Nicholas never could have dreamt he'd see the day when an ironwood looked so utterly disreputable. Owing to the presence of ironwoods on the island, and owing even more greatly to the fact that the Grand Master himself had likely put a bounty on his and Sophia's heads large enough to purchase said island, they were in disguise. Sophia had sullenly, but willingly, sheared her long, dark, curling locks to her shoulders and braided the remainder into a neat queue. He'd secured clothing from a sailor who shared, approximately, her small stature, and she wore it as comfortably as she did her own skin. Unexpected, given her past proclivity for silk and lace. Most surprising, however, was the leather patch over the now empty socket of her left eye. Nicholas's fears of her losing her eye after the brutal beating she'd suffered in Palmyra had been well-founded. By the time he and Hassan had brought her back to the hospital in Damascus, the wound had become infected, and her sight in that eye was already gone. Sophia had elected for a slow death by rot and fever, rather than willingly let any of the physicians remove it, no doubt for vanity's sake. Yet when they at last had been forced to remove it, some part of her must have wanted to survive, because she had not retreated from life even in the fiercest clutches of agony. In fact, she had healed quickly, and he had to begrudgingly admit her force of will, once she made a decision, was something to be feared. It was a lucky thing, too. While she recovered in Damascus, Nicholas received an unexpected note from Rose, left inside Hassan's home for him to find. "Circumstances prevent me from waiting the month out, as discussed. We will meet on October 13th in Nassau, or not at all." At some point during her ride back to Damascus from Palmyra, where they had agreed to their original meeting, something had clearly changed in Rose's evaluation of these circumstances. Without details, however, Nicholas hadn't the slightest idea if he should be afraid, or merely irritated she expected them to be able to travel so far so quickly. As sympathetic as he was to Sophia's wounds, the idea that her injuries might cause them to miss their opportunity to discover the last common year had ignited a sickening panic and no small amount of resentment in him. But her bruises and cuts had faded over the nearly 2 weeks since her beating, until 3 days past, she'd been strong enough to begin to navigate them through a series of passages. And finally, after one short chartered voyage from Florida, they had arrived to find Rose nowhere.
"She's not bringing Etta with her, if that's what's got you looking like a puppy about to piddle on the floor," Sophia said. "Don't you think we would have seen them by now if that were the case?"
He hadn't expected Rose to arrive with Etta, safe and healing from her own wound, in tow. At least not since that morning. Hope, as it turned out, dwindled like sand through an hourglass. Nicholas forced himself to take a steadying breath. Her hatred of him minced the air between them, and over the past weeks, her feelings had scarred into something far uglier.